Welcome to episode 27 of the G5 Hive, where we aim to bring you all the honey in G5 college football. How you doing tonight, Luke?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. We debuted our new intro, 2024 intro tonight.
Yep. You did a great job, Justice. I would not know the first thing that I'm doing on that, and you knocked it out of the park.
Thanks, man. I think the hardest thing is trying to get the audio lined up and getting the volumes right and all that. That's kind of the hard part. The rest of it's not too bad, but yeah, little change up there. We had what was it, Torrey Horton, Ashton Genty, Ishmael Mahdi, Byron
Friend of the
Brown,
podcast.
and Jalen Royals. Yeah, yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Uh, Also, this week you and I were on Chasing the Natty,
Yes.
which we recorded yesterday. That was released earlier today, and talking about G5 coaching changes. We talked about, I guess 11. Does that sound right?
10.
Yeah, I think we had
Well,
10. We had
maybe
10,
11
but then
with
10.
Georgia.
Yeah. He wanted to talk about Georgia State with Del McGee.
Yep.
So we talked about 11 coaching changes there. Some of them were ones we had previously done in our series here on this podcast, and then a couple that we're actually going to talk about again tonight with JMU and Georgia State. So good stuff. Definitely check it out. We did a really deep dive for that podcast. Talked about some names a little bit and more in depth than perhaps we talked about on our own show. We gave looked at more like wide receivers and like who to target in terms of slot versus outside, that kind of stuff. So yeah, good stuff. Go check it out on Chasing the Natty. It's available on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.
And a shout out to Jared giving us two chances to really get out there. We did the mock draft with Chasing the Natty. I don't know, about a month ago at this point, or close to it, and then this highlight. So getting our name out there, getting some movement, and hopefully that leads to a couple bigger things coming. This spring and summer and going forward.
Yeah, definitely excited for what Luke and I have planned for you guys. So stay tuned for that. But we'll head on over to the news and notes, what the swarm needs to know. So this past week, the college football playoff group approved the 5-7 model. I think that was expected. I know a lot of folks were one, and so that's 5 automatic qualifiers from the top 5 conferences. So that's the P4, and then 1 G5 conference, and then 7 at large. The Pac-2, they aren't eligible for one of those 5 spots. A lot of people, and it had to be a unanimous vote. And so I think a lot of people thought that maybe the G5 would not vote to approve this, because if they kept it to 6-6, then that would have meant 2 G5 conferences got at larges. But they did approve it. What do you think about that, Luke?
I think it's good. What I was more afraid of would have been because Washington State and Oregon State, right? They had I don't know if it's an injunction or a suit against the NCAA to keep the Pac-12 name. So actually, they have the rights to the Pac-12, and it's just those two. So, and I think they have a seat at the table
Well, I
because
mean,
they're
they might have a
taking
seat. They might have a seat at the table to vote,
right.
but
So,
they don't have a
so
seat
if
at the
you
table in terms of an automatic bid, because
right,
you have to have 8 teams in your conference to get the automatic bid. So yeah, they were part of
but
the vote.
but I would have thought if you're going to try to keep the Pac 12 in the future, like that's kind of what I gained from this is or gleaned from it
Good
is
point.
hey, if we are going to try to build up the Pac 12 or we're going to try to take the Mountain West and take teams from there to make the Pac 12, I want to keep the 6-6 so I can get my automatic berth. okay, we're now voting 5 and 7. That tells me the Pac-12 future is spoken for. It's done. That's what I got out of that.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that. But I mean, yeah, I think it's inevitable, right? Unless someone else comes calling, like the pack two, pack whatever, it's kind of done. I think people say, well, why would the G5 approve this and not stick with the 6 and 6 so they got 2 automatic bids? I mean, the only reason I can come up with is kind of an act of good faith, right? If they had kind of said, no, we're not going to approve it, and we get, for the next 2 years, we're going to get 2 teams, then when it comes back up for vote in 2026, maybe the others would be like, hey, we're not going to include you at all anymore.
And I think there's probably, I think a lot of these people are smart that are in the conversations and did due diligence in talking to others. And if they know that they're the only ones that are voting that way, then it makes sense to switch the vote. Now, if you've got, strength in numbers, if you've got like a third of the room that says no, well, hey, let's vote no, let's keep our 2. And we know going into our next vote, 2 years, we can't have retaliation, votes type thing.
Yeah.
But also, maybe that's giving people too much credit and thinking about this stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, it's approved 5-7 moving forward. One of the more interesting rumors that did come out was, should be a shock, that the SEC and the Big Ten wanted 8 automatic qualifiers. So just from their schools, so that would only leave 4 more open, which just, I mean, I don't know how anyone's going to approve that, right? Like who's going to approve that? Other than the SEC and the Big Ten.
I mean, Justice. We all know if that's what happened, Iowa would win a national championship, and people are just trying to keep Iowa down. That's what this is about. People are trying to keep Iowa down.
If there was a national championship for playing defense and scoring the least amount of points, Iowa would win that every year, buddy.
So this is obviously
that's not how it works. But yeah, I mean, like I said, not a shocker there. I mean, I think we talked about before at some point, perhaps those 2 break off. They add some more, they break off and kind of do their own thing.
Yep.
There was some big G5 news today that dropped. University of Massachusetts has joined the MACtion. They have joined the MAC for all sports. They were one of, I guess, 3 independents left. So Notre Dame, UMass, and UConn are the 3 football independents that were left, and UMass has kind of left that fold. So starting in the 2025 football season, all their sports will be in the MAC. Kind of interesting move, I think. It's good for their football team. Basketball, maybe it's a good move. I don't know. I mean, from a conference standpoint, they were in the A10. A10 is a much better basketball conference than the MAC. But they hadn't been to a NCAA tournament, I think, like in 10 years. So maybe they'll go to the MAC and they'll be the big dog in basketball, and they'll keep making they'll start making some NCAA tournaments again. I don't know, but good news for the MAC.
Yeah, MAC should get an easy win in football every time that they play UMass.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they can improve, right? I mean, hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah.
A little bit of coaching news, some conferences that we had already talked about. UTEP is hiring Ryan Stanchek as their new co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. He was previously the offensive line coach at Tulsa. I'm trying to remember is the Austin P guy the other OC?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
As a guess, that's what I would think. 'Cause so many of the Austin P guys came over.
Yep.
The some little player news. Jaden Delore, while he was not technically, never played in the G5, he was at Texas State for a few weeks. But he has entered the NFL draft. I guess no one wanted to deal with any kind of baggage that he had, and that's kind of why he had to leave Texas State. Personally, don't see him getting drafted. He's probably going to end up, up in the Great North somewhere, either the Canadian CFL, I would guess, or maybe
the
Spring
new
League.
maybe the new North American ice football or whatever that is. Maybe he brings
Yeah.
his speed to that.
I was thinking more along the Spring League.
The
But
USFL.
yeah. UNLV quarterback Doug Brumfield has medically retired from football. He was there. He was at UNLV. They brought in 2 transfer quarterbacks. I don't think he was really had much of a chance of winning that job, but nonetheless, he's done with football, and that kind of just narrows it down to the 2 transfers
One
there
less
at
person.
UNLV. Yep, one less
Yep.
person. And probably the big news, the biggest piece of G5 news I feel dropped, other than maybe some coaching news recently, is Ball State running back Marquez Cooper to the transfer portal.
We'll see where he goes. But yeah, that's a big hit to Ball State. A lot of people are assuming it's San Diego State following over Sean Lewis, as he was there at Kent State with him. So that would make a lot of sense, but we will see where Marquez Cooper ends up.
Yeah, San Diego State's kind of, like you said, the one that immediately comes to mind. And reuniting there with Sean Lewis. They don't necessarily need a running back, but he's Sean Lewis guy.
The thing that's most interesting about this move is that the schools have already started their semesters, so he can't transfer in anywhere in the spring.
No.
And I'll be curious if he's just put his name into the portal, but he's still doing classes. Because then, if anything, I would say
he couldn't be. That couldn't. Well, I guess it could be, but in order to put his name in the portal, which has officially been in the portal, it means he has to be a grad transfer.
Okay.
So he has to have his degree. And so that doesn't mean he wasn't doing grad work. He could have been doing grad work at Ball State for sure.
It just seems like, from a athletic standpoint, why don't I just stay with Ball State? If I'm not able to get a playbook and learn something from the team that I'm going to go to, why don't I just go through, knowing I'm not going to be here, go through meetings or whatever you have to do, but do your workouts so you stay in shape, in your football shape, and you get that portion of it. Spring session comes open for you to enter the portal, then you just do it then. I don't understand the benefit of doing it right now.
Well, I mean,
maybe I'm missing something.
I think if he was to stay at Ball State, then he's going to go through spring practice, all that stuff, spring game, and so he runs the risk of injury.
I guess, but
that's probably really the biggest downside, is that risk of injury.
Okay.
Some spring practice news. Hawaii spring game was last night. Haven't really seen too much yet at this point, but we'll keep a lookout. Maybe we'll have some news for you here in the very near future. Unfortunately, it wasn't televised. The Liberty spring game is this coming Saturday, March 2nd. And then we have a couple teams kicking off spring practice this week. Bowling Green starts the 29th, and North Texas starts March 2nd with a spring game on April 6th.
I'm excited to see what North Texas looks like, because we got um, Zach Evans transfer from Minnesota goes there. They've got some interesting pieces, and I'm excited to see what that team looks like.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like most of these G5s, the spring games aren't televised anywhere. They're not on ESPN. So, we'll be digging for news as they go through practice and on their games to kind of share with you guys. So, what's up, Hollywood? How you doing tonight, buddy? Glad for you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your support. All right, moving on to our topic for this week, the transfer portal in the Sun Belt, as well as coaching changes. There aren't too many coaching changes, at least with this half of the Sun Belt. We're going to split it up half and half, kind of like we did the Mountain West, just due to the sheer number of teams. And the first team up are the Appalachian State Mountaineers.
All right, coaching changes. We don't have any. We got a new coaching staff in here this last year. They're gonna run it back here for year 2, so a lot of things will stay the same. Who's leaving? Who's coming? Justice.
So they lose last year's opening game starter and subsequent backup, Ryan Berger. He is off to Liberty. Running back Nate Noel is off to Missouri. Wide receiver Deshaun Davis is in the transfer portal. They also lose 3 starting offensive linemen. They do bring some talent in. They're bringing over quarterback Charles Wright over from Texas to back up Joey Aguilar. Wide receiver, one time was a pretty high recruit for Louisville. William Foles, wide receiver, coming over from Louisville. And then another Power 5 receiver, and Xavier Short coming over from South Carolina. As I mentioned, just a few seconds ago, Joey Aguilar does return as their quarterback. He was a top option, for CFF last year from the G5, and he did the start. I think he started game 3, maybe game 2.
Yeah, 2 or 3. 2 or 3.
He didn't start the whole season. Berger kind of started and then got hurt, and then Aguilar took over and kind of took the job. Ryan Berger got Wally pipped, I guess you would say. Yep. But yeah, Joey Aguilar had a great season last year, 3,754 yards, 33 touchdowns, 268 yards a game. Yeah, great season from Joey Aguilar. They had the passing attack working last year for Appalachian State. Despite losing Nate Noel, their running back room returns a lot. They do share the ball quite a bit there. And, Nate Noel was hurt throughout last year. They got other guys some run. Kanye Roberts returns. He's their leading returning rusher. He had 696 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. Miguel Haywood also returns. He came over last season from Navy. He was their second leading rusher, 318 yards. And Amani Marshall, who didn't do too much last year, but if you go back to 2022, he did a little bit more. Maybe he'll get a little bit more run this year. He only had 65 yards last season. All 3 of those guys return. Don't really have any concerns in terms of the production. I think the big thing is it's going to be a committee like it generally always is. Sometimes in the years past, the number 1 of that committee has been useful for fantasy purposes. Last year, Nate Noel had 825 yards, 5 touchdowns. Who's that going to be? My first guess would be Kanye Roberts, but we'll kind of see how things shake out there in spring practice. Going over to the receivers, other than Deshaun Davis, and they pretty much returned their top receivers. Caden Robinson was their top receiver last year. He had 67 catches on 91 targets for 905 yards and 10 touchdowns. He returns. Christian Horn returns. 566 yards and 6 touchdowns. Mekhi Jackson returns. Dalton Stroman returns. Tight end Eli Wilson returns. So, I mean, just a lot, at least in the skill positions, they got a lot of returning production coming back. But along the offensive line, they do have 3 of their starters are graduating, moving on. So they have to replace those. But I just feel like in general, not too much concern here for the Appalachian State offense and kind of picking up where they left off from last year.
I think they're going to just the Sun Belt has some changes. JMU, we'll get to them later. They're not going to. I'm not as sold on JMU going forward. I think App State is currently who I would pick to win the Sun Belt right now, as of today.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to do it in a sexy way. They're just going to grind out some wins, run the ball, and I just hopefully they play in a couple more games that are not like that bowl game, right? Because they played in that tsunami.
Yeah. down in Orlando.
Yeah. So,
the game they had like 15 or 16 fumbles, something like that.
Yeah. So I think App State primed to be Sun Belt champions.
In terms of returning production overall, the team, they rank 3rd in the Sun Belt, 65th in all of FBS. Looking at the offensive only, they rank looks like 23rd in offense only in the FBS. So, yeah, a lot going for Appalachian State coming into this season. Next up is the Arkansas State Red Wolves.
Again, no changes here. A lot of the continuity staying the same. Head coach, right? Is it Butch Jones? Is that the head coach, I believe?
That's correct.
So that team running the same. Got a great quarterback, wide receiver coming in. So can't wait to see how they utilize him, right, Justice?
Yeah.
Malik Hornsby. But yeah, coaching changes wise, I don't think there'll be much of a change. I don't know, how many guys they're really losing, but last year they were 6-7. They are probably a game better, but they're probably right around that 500 in this conference.
So not much coaching change and not much personnel change either. They are number 1 in the Sun Belt in terms of returning production. They do lose backup quarterback Jackson Daly. He's over to Northern Iowa. Quarterback JT Shrout is out of eligibility, and wide receiver Jeff Foreman, who seems like he was there forever, is also out of eligibility. The only player of any note that is coming in is who Luke alluded to earlier. Supposedly he's coming in to play wide receiver, Malik Hornsby, Texas State. It wouldn't shock me that he's the backup quarterback. Like Jalen Raynor goes down week 1, Malik Hornsby is going to be the quarterback. That's just kind of how I feel. So yeah, like be interesting to see what kind of eligibility he gets on Fantrax. If he's a receiver, he might be worth like a late round pick, and hoping and maybe Raynor gets hurt and they throw Hornsby out there at quarterback, right?
I don't know how great those stats would be, but yeah,
stranger things can happen, though, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it could be worth a potential dart throw, provided he's wide receiver eligible.
I've definitely had worse picks, but it's an easy. I feel like you need a drop a player. It's an easy drop, and you don't feel bad about it.
Absolutely. They do have quarterback Jalen Raynor returning, true freshman last year, kind of burst on the scene, I think, like week 4, maybe 3. He had 2,543 yards passing, 17 touchdowns. The excitement for him was kind of his rushing ability. 380 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. I think a lot of people thought that he might leave, that he might enter the portal this year. He's decided to stay at Arkansas State and kind of lead that offense. The running backs, Jaquez Cross returns, Zach Wallace returns, their top two. Cedric Hawkins also returns. Jaquez Cross was their top rusher last season, 716 yards, 7 touchdowns, 55 yards a game. Looking at the receivers, they do lose Jeff Foreman. They bring in Malik Hornsby to play receiver. Corey Rucker returns. He was their leading receiver last year. This is a terrible stat line in terms of like drops, or I don't know if it's all drops or what, but he caught 36 balls on 82 targets. That's not good. 705 yards, 2 touchdowns. Courtney Jackson, their second leading receiver, had 689 yards and 7 touchdowns. Their top tight end, Miller McCrumbie, returns, but he's not really anything that you're interested in from a fantasy perspective. Offensive line, they only lose one offensive lineman. So, yeah. Things should hopefully improve for Arkansas State. Maybe they'll get to bowl eligibility and maybe have a chance to win the West. All right, next up is the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers.
No coaching changes. I mean, we did just have a change last year. Tim Beck coming over, being the head coach there, so they're going to run it back here. Year 2, projection for this team. I feel like they'll be top half of the league for sure. They definitely lose a lot of guys that you'll talk about. But getting Noah Kim in at quarterback should help, but they are losing, in my opinion, that the heart of the offense in, Grayson McCall, who pisses teal. I mean, it's in his blood. Sam Pinckney and Jared Brown. Jared Brown, going over to South Carolina, but I think losing those 3 really, really hurts this team. So I feel like it's going to be hard to replicate what they did last year. But I guess no coaching changes. Justice, I'll let you talk about who's coming, who's going there.
Like you said, Grayson McCall's gone. He's gone off to NC State. Losing him's big. He kind of feel like he was like, he was their best player and kind of put them on the map, right? And he's gone. Backup quarterback Jarrett Guest is gone over to Bryant. Running back CJ Beasley is off to Georgia State. Running back Reese White out of eligibility. Wide receiver Sam Pinckney is out of eligibility. Wide receiver Jared Brown is off to South Carolina. And wide receiver Tyson Mobley is off to Liberty. They do bring some talent in. As you mentioned, they bring in quarterback Noah Kim coming over from Michigan State. Running back Christian Washington coming over from New Mexico. And wide receiver Seneca McKee coming over from UNLV. Quarterback room, I'd imagine it's going to be a battle in the spring between Ethan Vasco and Noah Kim. I'd probably going to give the edge to Vasco, right? He's been in the system a year now. I thought he played well in the I think he had 2 starts at the end of last season. Thought he played well in those 2 games. I'm just going to give the edge to Vasco. Running backs, they do return Braden Bennett, who was their leading rusher last year, but he only had 407 yards, 5 touchdowns. Max Baltazar returns, Javon Simpkins returns, and then, as I mentioned, Christian Washington is transferring in, coming over from New Mexico. The receiver room, they lose their top 2 guys. Their top returning receiver is Jamison Tucker, a sophomore, who had 34 targets last year, caught 20 balls, 423 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, if they're other than Grayson McCall and Ethan Vasco when he was the starter, the receivers were some viable assets from a CFF perspective. Sam Pinckney broke the 1,000-yard mark last year, 1,027 yards, 8 touchdowns. Jared Brown had 740 yards and 4 touchdowns. So definitely we want to pay attention to who is going to be, that number one receiving option for Coastal Carolina, and they, someone that can help us out on our fantasy football teams. Looking at their offensive line, they only lose one starter from last year, so not too bad there. I think the key to them is going to be having some receivers step up for Vasco, or if it happens to be Noah Kim. That's kind of be the kind of, I think, big area to pay attention to in the spring. Is there a receiver kind of stepping up into that wide receiver one role?
And then I'm not sure. I guess I didn't pay much attention, but do we know who called the plays? Do we know if it was Tim Beck or if it was the OC Travis Trickett?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know.
So just some breakdowns of this, not including last year. So this is not including last year, but Tim Beck's quarterbacks average 25.38 points per game in a 6-point per touchdown league. The running back one gets you 16 points per game. So that was a little bit less this last year. So maybe it's not Tim Beck, I guess. And then he's also had 2 1,000-yard receivers in his time as an OC, at Texas and whatnot. So that's a potential. And then if it's Travis Trickett, that's something you pretty much just don't want any part of. QBs average 19 points per game. Running backs average 8 points per game. And wide receivers, he's only had one 1,000-yard receiver. That was Penny Hart in 2017. But yeah, his wide receiver ones average, let's see here, 15.2. So not bad for a wide receivers, which kind of lines up with how they were this last year. So
yeah, receivers were okay, and a quarterback, running back,
so
you didn't want no part of.
So maybe it's a Trickett system. I mean, he did follow him over. He did follow Tim Beck over, so maybe that would make sense. But yeah, so you definitely don't want a running back, and maybe you can take a stab at a quarterback or a wide receiver. But I'm probably just steering clear of Coastal Carolina for fantasy purposes this year.
I mean, I think if Vasco wins the job, I could see someone taking a stab at him late in the draft just because of his rushing ability. I mean, he was the second leading rusher, and he only played like 2.5 games. So he had 390 yards something like that last year. So his rushing ability, if he's going to be the starter, that could get him on a college fantasy football roster. All right, moving over to the Georgia Southern Eagles.
All right, Georgia Southern Eagles coaching changes out just last week, 2 weeks ago. It was relatively not. I mean, I don't want to say relatively soon. It wasn't that long ago. Brian Ellis, he was the OC. He goes to become the Alabama tight end coach, and in comes new OC Ryan Applin. He was Georgia Southern's tight end coach, so this will be the first time he's calling plays. Will he actually be calling plays? Personally, I hope not. Hopefully, it's Clay Helton. Again, this team limped into the bowl season this last year, pretty much got bowl eligible, and then decided, hey, Sunbelt, how can we help every one of you get into a bowl? Here's some wins. But I did take a look at Ryan Applin, and here's what we have. In 2018 and 2019, he was the OC at North Alabama. In 2020, he was the co-OC at Western Michigan.
Western Kentucky.
Western Kentucky. His averages during that time are 23.69 points per game, 32 pass attempts, and 32 rush attempts. His quarterbacks have averaged 19.41 points per game. Running backs, the rushing share. So the quarterbacks do run the ball in his system. So the running back one will get 37.59% of the rushes for 9.57 points per game. Wide receiver one seasonal average is 45 receptions, 515 yards, and 4 touchdowns, good for 11.45 points per game. I don't really want any part of that. So again, Clay Helton probably takes the coaching, but that was a team that was limping at the end of the year. So it'll be interesting to see how the Eagles play this year. Justice, who do we got coming and going?
Well, they lose their starting quarterback, Davis Brown. He is out of eligibility. They also lose quarterback Bo Allen, who had transferred in last year from Kentucky. He had to sit last year out, and then he transferred back to Kentucky. They lose their do-everything all-star CFF stud wide receiver Caleb Hood, who is out of eligibility. Wide receiver Anthony Quealy is out of eligibility. Tight end J.J. McAfee out of eligibility. Tight end Keaton Upshaw out of eligibility. And they lose 3 of their starting offensive linemen. They do bring in a couple guys. They bring in quarterback Dexter Williams II coming over from Indiana. Wide receiver LV Bunkley Shelton coming over from Oklahoma. And tight end Tyler Fromm coming over from Auburn. Returning at quarterback is J.C. French, who did get some run time last year. He was really more used for his legs last year than really passing the ball. So it'd be an interesting battle, I think, between French and Dexter Williams. Something that definitely I think we should at least pay attention to just based on the historical production from that quarterback position. Although I don't know that either one of them is a very, prolific passer, and maybe you're going to see more running out of the quarterback than what we've seen in the past. And maybe that'll help offset the lack of passing from the two. Running back Jalen White returns. He was their leading rusher a year ago. 889 yards, 9 touchdowns, just under 81 yards per game. O.J. Arnold also returns, 411 yards, 4 touchdowns last year, just over 41 yards per game. Looking at the receivers, kind of where the a lot of the production is gone with losing 2 receivers and 2 tight ends. Their leading returning receiver will be Derwin Burgess Jr., who last season had 74 catches on 109 targets, 813 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Dalen Cobb also returns. Their third leading receiver, 40 catches, 59 targets, 601 yards, and 2 touchdowns. As I mentioned, Caleb Hood is gone. So that's he vacates 133 targets, 101 catches, 948 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Tight end J.J. McAfee, who was somewhat productive by tight end standards last season, 378 yards and 4 touchdowns is gone. The backup tight end Keaton Upshaw, 173 yards, 2 touchdowns is gone. So my personal opinion is Tyler Fromm coming over from Auburn. Maybe he's someone you can look at to get some tight end production. At the end of drafts. Their third tight end, their third leading tight end is also gone out of eligibility, Bo Johnson. So that the only returning production that they have is Evan Lester Jr., who caught 2 balls for 22 yards, and Elijah Walton, who caught 1 ball for 7 yards. I'd like Tyler Fromm's chances of starting there at tight end for Georgia Southern. Dalen Cobb probably moves into a starting role, and not sure who's going to kind of take over that other. I think they usually run 3 receivers. Not sure who that third guy will be at this point, but definitely something to pay attention to for spring ball. As I mentioned, they do lose 3 offensive line stars that they're going to have to replace. I think all the signs point to maybe a little bit of a downtick, right, for the offense as a whole. At least the passing game, anyway. So maybe temper your expectations there a little bit, kind of see how they look in the spring and go from there.
Yeah, I'm hoping I've got Burgess left over on a couple teams that I'm hoping he's able to produce at least wide receiver 2 numbers for me, which I hope should be the case, but we will see.
All right. Staying in the state of Georgia and going over to the Georgia State Panthers.
All right, coaching changes out. Head coach Sean Elliott goes to become the South Carolina tight end coach. In comes new head coach Del McGee, the former running backs coach at Georgia. Interesting. Really hated. There's a lot of things here. I don't know any of these people's personal lives, what they have going on. As I get older, their priorities in my life change, but dropping out or quitting on the team into spring practice, not a big fan of that. At least just do the last 15, I guess 13 practices or whatever, and then head out. I mean, maybe you feel like you're doing the team a disservice by doing that, so you want to head out early to get a new guy to come in. I don't know. There's a sour taste in my mouth with really how that went down. But again, I don't know what people got going on in their personal lives. Maybe something can't really control, etc. And then not official, but it's a rumor right now that Jim Chaney will be the offensive coordinator at Georgia State. He was the OC at Georgia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and then Kevin, is it Sure?
Yeah.
Sure, as a defensive coordinator, and he's worked for teams like Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and the New York Giants and Georgia Tech. So we will see what that staff looks like. It definitely will look different than it probably is today when you get a new head coach in this late. Maybe it looks the same for a year, and then it changes. We'll see.
Yeah, the Jim Chaney news is not exciting for college fantasy football.
No.
So yeah, it's kind of a downer there. But as we talked yesterday on Jared's show on Chasing the Natty, like they lose a lot. So I think
they got their work cut out for him, and McGee's supposed to be a really good recruiter. He's there in Georgia. He's been there for a long time. Hopefully, he can bring in some kids, and he's been recruiting the state of Georgia pretty well. So hopefully, he can maybe steal a couple guys here or there, and then like you mentioned yesterday, maybe they become a team that gets Georgia's rejects of guys that maybe don't see the field, and come there, go play for a year, and then maybe recoup some of their stock.
Yeah, there was, I guess moving to who they're losing, we'll talk about what that means for the positions. But just in terms of returning production from an offensive standpoint only, they rank 132nd out of 134 teams.
36, maybe 136 now.
Might be 135 now with Kennesaw State, but it's down at the bottom. They rank 12th in the Sun Belt, so they lose a lot of personnel in addition to all the coaching changes. They're do everything. Quarterback Darren Granger's out of eligibility. Quarterback Michael Colacerdo is in the transfer portal. Running back Marcus Carroll's off to Missouri. Running back KZ Adams is off to South Carolina State. Wide receiver Robert Lewis over to Auburn. Wide receiver Jakari Carter, Talik Williams, and Rico Arnold are all in the portal. They lose 4 of their starting offensive linemen as well as their top 2 reserves. Yeah, just not good news from a returning production standpoint. They do bring some pieces back in. Quarterback Zach Gibson comes over from Georgia Tech. Running back Dominique Thomas coming from Clemson. Running back C.J. Beasley comes over from Coastal Carolina. We talked about earlier. You got to assume that Zach Gibson is going to be their starter. They don't really have anyone else there, I think, to fill that starter role. So I think Zach Gibson is looking like he's going to be the starter at quarterback. At running back, the big name at the end of last year in their bowl game, Freddie Brock, he does return. And my guess is, he's going to be part of a committee, especially if it's Jim Chaney as their offensive coordinator. I think yesterday we thought that maybe running back would be the one bright spot, given the fact that they do seem to have some talent there at running back. But, if it's going to be Chaney as the head coach, that's got all the makings of a running back committee there. So not sure that you're even going to see any kind of fantasy value there at running back. And as I mentioned earlier, receivers a mess. They lose their top 3 receivers. They do return. Their leading returning receiver is Kadarius Thomas, who had caught 25 balls for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. They do return some guys that had some potential at one point, with Josias Credle returning. Last year, he caught 14 balls, 142 yards. And then Peter Kikwata, who was I think a 4-star by some recruiting services and a 3-star by all the others. He originally was at Old Dominion. After his first year at Old Dominion, he transferred over to Georgia State. He is still there. So perhaps they can get something going. Like I said, offensive line's a mess. This team, and especially with the Jim Chaney news, just looks like a total avoid for me. I don't have any reason to invest in anyone from Georgia State at this point.
Wasn't there a unique, I'll just say, like, connection or whatnot with Dominique Thomas at Clemson?
Well, that's because I think yesterday Jared mentioned that was it Streeter might come over and be the OC, and so they would have some connection from Clemson. But current rumors, that's not the case. So,
all
right, moving on to the James Madison Dukes,
the unofficial champions, right, of the Sun Belt. That this might be one of those teams that goes like from first to close to worse. I don't think they will be worse, but it'll.
I don't think so.
It's going to be
I'd be surprised if they dominate the conference like they have, though.
Yeah. So out as Kirk Cinnity becomes a head coach at Indiana. DC Bryant Hines goes to be the defensive coordinator there. Indiana, and OC Mike Shanahan. Oh my God, we got a Super Bowl champion here going to be the OC at Indiana. But in comes new head coach Bob Chesney, Holy Cross head coach. Then OC Dean Kennedy was the offensive coordinator at Holy Cross, and then Lyle Hempfield, DC was Duke's safety coach. But yeah, going to be the new DC. What does that mean for James Madison? Well, Bob Chesney was the head coach at Holy Cross from 2018 to 2023. During that time, they averaged 29.76 points per game, 23.8 pass attempts per game, and 40.3 rush attempts per game. The RB1 averages 34.07% of the rushing share. The QB has averaged 32.8, so nice running quarterback in his system, which is interesting. As you know, Justice will talk about who's coming and leaving. Running back 1 has averages 802.3 yards. on 138 attempts and about 8 touchdowns, good for 12.52 points per game. Your quarterback alone is on the ground has averaged 14.68 points with passing 25.99, and wide receiver one averages 45 receptions, 681 yards, and 7 touchdowns, good for 13.62 points per game. So that's kind of an idea when we go into the players. Justice, who do we've got leaving and coming?
They lose quite a bit on the offense, as you might imagine, most of them following Signetti over to Indiana. They lose quarterback Jordan McLeod, who, strangely enough, is still in the transfer portal. Running back Kalen Black is following Signetti over to Indiana. Running back Tyson Lawton, also over to Indiana. Running back Latrell Palmer is out of eligibility. Wide receiver Elijah Surratt over to Indiana. Wide receiver Reggie Brown is out of eligibility. Wide receiver Phoenix Sproles is out of eligibility. And tight end Zach Horton is off to Indiana. Now, they do bring in some talent. They bring in quarterback Dylan Morse, former, I think, 4-star guy, coming over from Washington. Another highly rated recruit, running back George Pettaway, coming up over from North Carolina. Running back Ayo Adeyi, coming over from North Texas. Running back Tyler Purdy, following the coaching staff over from Holy Cross. Wide receiver Cameron Ross, coming from UConn. Wide receiver Nakai Poole, Mississippi State. And tight end Logan Kyle, Vanderbilt. As we mentioned, they do lose Jordan McLeod. They bring in Dylan Morris. Brett Griffiths, Alonzo Barnett, and Billy Atkins all return at quarterback. And we talked about this, yesterday. Dylan Morris is just a weird fit based on what these coaches have done in the past, right? He offers no rushing upsides to speak of. The last few years with Matt Saluka, who's over at UNLV, he's like, 1,400 yards a season. You're not going to see that kind of rushing production from Dylan Morris. So it just seems like a strange fit for the offense.
Yeah, so this is Saluka's last 3 years. 2021, 868 rushing yards. In 2022, a little over 1,200, and in 2023, a little over 1,200 again.
So Dylan Morris doesn't fit what they've done in the past in terms of a running quarterback, and certainly a running quarterback to lead the team in rushing. Griffiths and Barnett, they're definitely better rushers than Dylan Morris, but I don't know. I just gotta believe Dylan Morris, I think, was probably brought there for a reason. So gotta have to give him the edge heading into the spring. Running backs, like I said, they bring in Adeyi from North Texas and George Pettaway, both similar in stature. The only concern I have with the two quarterbacks is neither one of them is great in pass protection. And so, if Dylan Morris is going to be the starting quarterback, they're going to need running backs that can be capable of pass protection. So that's just a little bit of word of caution there with those two running backs. They're definitely both talented, and perhaps they will take over that market share left by not having a running quarterback. We'll see. Receivers, they lose a lot at receiver. They lose their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, their top 6 receivers from last year. As I mentioned, they do bring in Cameron Ross. But as we discussed on Chasing the Natty yesterday, this system, the number one receiver is typically an outside guy. Cameron Ross, to this point, at least at UConn, was used primarily in the slot. If you're looking at one of the outside guys, perhaps Tajee Hudson or Troy Lewis or Maxwell Moss, who are returners, or maybe Nakai Poole, who came over from Mississippi State, would be ones to look at. Offensive line, they lose two starters there. So yeah, I'm just really, I think to me the story is kind of see if Dylan Morris is going to be the starter, how this offense changes with him.
So with Bob Chesney previously, before Saluka came in, he had two pocket quarterbacks.
Okay.
In 2018, it was Jeff Wade, and in 2019, it was Connor Degrahart. Without rushing stats put in because they're minimal, like 55 total yards and no touchdowns in 2019 and like 200 in 2018. So like you're not really getting anything, maybe a point, if that. The quarterbacks average points per game, 13.55 points per game.
Nothing too exciting, right?
So in 2018, it was
what the running backs look like.
Running
good
backs,
pitch quarterbacks. I just wondering, like, did the running backs did he have some 1,000-yard running backs back then when he didn't? He wasn't giving all the carries to the quarterback.
No, the running back one in 2018, Dominique Cozier had 643 yards on 130 attempts, 8 touchdowns. And then in 2019, same running back, he did have 1,147 yards. So he did have a 1,000-yard rusher. I don't know what Dominique was in 2018. Maybe he was a freshman. I do not know that. So he got 13 attempts per game in 2018 and then 15 in 2019. So he's pretty effective with those. So those stats, he was 11.23 points per game in 2018 and 13.06 points per game in 2019. So did have a 1,000-yard rusher, maybe good there for George Pettaway.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, part of the problem too is they brought two of them in, right? They brought Adeyi and Pettaway. From a recruiting standpoint, Pettaway is the more talented guy, but in terms of college production, Adeyi is the more talented guy, right? So I gotta believe it's going to be some kind of split between the two. At this point, I don't really know what to predict that to be, though.
So in 2028 or 2020, in 2018, RB1 got 43.62% and RB2 got 35.57. So, and then you had a smattering of guys that just kind of took a little bit here and there. And then in 2019, it was 63.73% for RB1 and 36.27 for RB2. So 2018, he had 3 running backs that he used from time to time, and then 19, 2 running backs, so like a 60-40 split.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. This will be one of the teams I'd like to pay attention to in the spring, just to kind of see how things shake out in terms of maybe get some word on what that offense is looking like, and if one of these running backs is kind of taking the lead over the other. All right, moving on to the last team for tonight, the Louisiana Raging Cajuns.
All right, and no changes here for the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. So, Justice, what do we have here for players leaving?
So they do lose quarterback Zion Chris, who I think some people were excited last year in the fantasy world. But he moves on to Houston, where I'm assuming he's going to battle Donovan Smith for that starting job. They lose running back / receiver Jacob Caboti, who's out of eligibility. Wide receiver Peter LeBlanc out of eligibility. And tight end Neil Johnson is also out of eligibility. Quarterback Chandler Fields returns. And then last year's starter, at least for the beginning of the year before he got hurt, Ben Wooldridge returns as well. I assume it's going to be a battle between the two of them to kind of see who will take the starting reins. At running back, they return Draylen Washington, their second leading rusher last year, 515 yards, 2 touchdowns. Cabote was their leading rusher last year with 729 yards and 7 touchdowns. They also return Zylan Perry and Bill Davis at running back. Going over to receiver, their leading receiver returns. That was Jacob Bernard, 39 catches, 45 targets, 476 yards, and a touchdown. 13% target share. They lose LeBlanc, their second leading receiver. Their third leading receiver, Robert Williams, returns. Last season, he had 31 catches for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns. And their tight end, Neil Johnson, is out of eligibility. But from a fantasy standpoint, he was someone that was rosterable and startable. He did have 383 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. Their top returning tight end is who was a freshman last season, Terrence Carter. And he did have 28 catches for 255 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it's definitely a name, I think, to file away for tight ends. The tight end landscape in college fantasy football is always pretty rough, especially here in the G5. So Terrence Carter is definitely a name to file away. Kind of a late stab there at tight end. As far as offensive line, they only lose one starter. I mean, I don't know from a fantasy standpoint there's anyone here that gets you excited. I think Chris would have had he stayed at Louisiana. Like I said, the only one that maybe I could see people rostering at this point would be Terrence Carter, the tight end, but he's probably not going to get drafted, and you'd be able to add him through waivers in most leagues. So, yeah, not too much fantasy goodness here in Louisiana.
Yeah, 6 and 7 team last year, probably very similar, if not maybe a little bit of a downtick. But then I feel like the league in general has some downtick teams, so that they might win a game or two by default and actually have an uptick. We'll see.
All right, so that's going to do it for this week's show. We will be back next week to finish out this series and close out the Sun Belt with the other 7 teams, I guess it is. Thanks, everyone, for your support. Please rate, review, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at G5Hive. If you have any comments, questions, future show topics, anything you want to see, don't be bashful. Hit us up. We'll be happy to answer any questions, or can take into consideration any kind of what the content is that you guys want to see, especially here in the off season, right? As we're trying to look for content. We'll be scouring the spring games, spring news that we can share with you guys, and hopefully have some exciting things coming up here in the very near future.
And then if you guys listen to Chasing the Natty this week, and you listen to Justice and I talk about teams, like Justice mentioned at the beginning, here, we're trying to hit every single team, so we're not doing deep dives into every team. If that's what you guys want to hear, the deep dives into some teams, feel free to DM us a team or two that you're really interested in, and we'd be happy to do a deep dive into those teams or two, because we could literally talk about a team for a half hour ish, easily. So feel free to drop those in our DMs, either at Probasco Luke, at the G5 Hive, or I guess at G5 Hive. There is no the. At G5 Hive, or you can find Justice at Justice_2318. But thanks a lot, guys, and we will see you next week.